Imagine being handed a flashlight, a pistol with one magazine and a knife, then being told to crawl headfirst into a pitch-black hole barely wide enough for your shoulders, knowing that somewhere in that darkness every few feet could be your last. A snake hanging from the ceiling, a punji stake waiting for your hand, a Viet Cong soldier crouched in a hidden alcove with a pistol pointed at the exact spot where your head will appear. This was the job description for tunnel rats in Vietnam, and if you volunteered for it, you had about a 1 in 3 chance of being killed or wounded. And those were the official statistics. The reality underground was often far worse. Now, before we dive into the nightmare these men faced every single day, we need to understand what they were up against. Because what the Viet Cong built beneath the jungles of South Vietnam wasn't just a hiding spot. It was an entire underground world, engineered specifically to kill anyone who dared to enter. The Cu Chi tunnels and dozens of other complexes like them stretched for hundreds of miles beneath Vietnam's Iron Triangle. These weren't crude holes in the ground. The Viet Cong had spent years, sometimes decades, digging and perfecting these systems. The main tunnels measured just 70 to 80 centimeters high and 40 to 70 centimeters wide. That's roughly 2.5 feet tall and less than 2 feet across, about half the height of an average person. The Vietnamese fighters who built them could move through relatively easily because they were smaller in stature and had spent years adapting to the cramped conditions. But for American soldiers, many of whom were over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, these tunnels were coffins. The tunnel systems operated on 3 levels. The upper level sat 3 to 4 meters underground. The middle level at 6 meters housed living quarters and kitchens with smokeless stoves that vented through hidden shafts. And the deepest level, 8 to 12 meters down, that's where they put the hospitals, command centers, ammunition dumps, and storage facilities. When American bombers pounded the jungle above, the Viet Cong would simply retreat to the lowest level and wait it out. And when the bombing stopped, they'd climb back up and keep fighting. American commanders knew these tunnels existed. Intelligence reports kept coming in about enemy forces seemingly vanishing into thin air after firefights, about supply caches that couldn't be found, about entire enemy units operating in areas that should have been secured. By early 1966, it became clear that the only way to deal with these tunnels was to send men inside to clear them. And that's how the Tunnel Rat program began. Captain Herbert Thornton of the 1st Infantry Division was the man who organized the first specialized tunnel rat teams. He knew exactly what kind of soldiers he needed. They had to be small, under 5'5" or 5'6", with thin, wiry frames that could squeeze through passages where larger men would get stuck. But size was only the beginning. Thornton looked for volunteers who had an even temperament, an inquisitive mind, common sense, and exceptional bravery. He needed men who could think clearly in the dark, who wouldn't panic when the walls closed in, and who could make split-second decisions when something went wrong, because something always went wrong. About 700 men served as tunnel rats during the war. They came from American, Australian, New Zealand, and South Vietnamese units. Many were volunteers from engineer and demolition units who already understood explosives and how to identify booby traps. The casualty rate stood at roughly 33%, 1 in 3. Over the course of the war, 36 tunnel rats were killed and another 200 wounded. Those numbers might not sound catastrophic until you realize how small the total force was. If you carried a flashlight into those tunnels enough times, the odds said you weren't coming back. Let me tell you what entering a tunnel was actually like. The Viet Cong disguised the entrances. Sometimes they covered them with trapdoors made of woven bamboo and leaves, camouflaged so well that soldiers could walk right over them without noticing. Other times, they built false floors and wells with the real entrance hidden 50 feet down. Finding the entrance was step 1, and the entrance itself was usually booby-trapped. Carlos Garza, a tunnel rat with the 82nd Airborne, weighed 100 pounds with a 17-inch waist. He was exactly the kind of soldier Captain Thornton was looking for. Small enough to fit, tough enough to handle it. Garza recalled that before you even got inside, you had to check the entrance for tripwires connected to grenades, for pressure plates that would trigger mines, for any sign that the Viet Cong had left a present for whoever came looking. Miss one wire in the undergrowth and the entrance would collapse on you before you ever got underground. Once you made it past the entrance, you crawled forward with your flashlight. In one hand, and your pistol in the other. Most tunnel rats carried a .45 caliber M1911, though many hated it because the muzzle blast in those confined spaces would deafen you for minutes. Some carried .38 special revolvers, occasionally with improvised suppressors to reduce the noise. Others brought .25 caliber automatics or even sawed-off shotguns. The weapon didn't matter as much as you'd think because you only had one magazine. Fire more than a few shots and you were reloading in the dark, completely vulnerable, while the noise echoed through the tunnels, alerting every enemy fighter within 100 yards that someone was coming. Harold Roper was a tunnel rat in early 1966 during the first months when the program was still being figured out. He later said he felt more fear entering those tunnels than anything he'd experienced before or since in his life. And Roper was an experienced combat soldier. He'd been in firefights. He'd seen men die, but something about descending into that darkness, knowing you couldn't turn around, couldn't retreat quickly if you needed to, that terror was different. It was the knowledge that once you committed and crawled forward, the only way out was through. The Viet Cong designed every aspect of those tunnels to kill intruders. They built the passages with sharp turns and angles that blocked sightlines so you couldn't see what was waiting around the next bend. They dug small alcoves into the walls, hidden behind thin clay covers, where a defender could wait in silence while you crawled past, then shoot you in the back. They hung bamboo vipers from the ceiling at narrow choke points. These snakes were venomous and aggressive. If you saw one and shot it, the noise would alert the defenders. If you didn't see it, it struck your face or neck as you passed underneath. Booby traps were everywhere. Punji stakes, sharpened bamboo spears coated in human waste to cause infection, hidden in the floor or angled to impale your hand when you reached forward. Grenade traps with tripwires stretched across the tunnel at ankle height, invisible in the dim light of your flashlight. Trapdoors in the floor that opened onto pits filled with more stakes. Some tunnels had chambers rigged to flood when a hidden latch was triggered, drowning anyone inside. Others had scorpion pits where opening the wrong door would release swarms of venomous scorpions into the confined space. And if the traps didn't kill you, the environment might. The air underground was thick, humid, hard to breathe. In the deeper levels, carbon dioxide built up because the ventilation shafts couldn't always provide enough fresh air. One Australian tunnel rat became trapped between two chambers and suffocated from carbon monoxide buildup. His team couldn't reach him in time. They could hear him dying on the other side of the collapsed section, but couldn't dig through fast enough to save him. Tunnel rats learn to see with their ears. In total darkness, when your flashlight died or when you turned it off to avoid giving away your position, you listened. You listened for breathing, for the sound of fabric rustling, for the click of a rifle bolt or the scrape of a boot on the tunnel floor. You learned to smell danger, too. The Viet Cong fighters lived underground for weeks at a time. You could sometimes smell them before you saw them. Nuoc Mam fish sauce, cigarette smoke, the distinct odor of bodies in close quarters. But by the time you smelled them, you were already in their kill zone. Operation Cedar Falls in January 1967 was the largest ground operation of the war up to that point. 30,000 American and South Vietnamese troops swept through the Iron Triangle, hunting for Viet Cong strongholds. At the village of Ben Suc, Vietnamese paratroopers discovered what would become the most significant tunnel find of the war, a 3-story deep complex covering several acres beneath the village. The Viet Cong had built an entire command center down there, hospitals with operating rooms, ammunition factories, storage rooms filled with weapons and rice, sleeping quarters for hundreds of fighters. The complex had taken years to build, and the Viet Cong had done it right under the noses of South Vietnamese forces. Tunnel rats went in to map the complex and search for intelligence. Maps, documents, weapons caches, anything that might reveal enemy positions or plans. Later in the war, they went looking for American POWs. Nicholas Sanza was a tunnel rat who searched for missing Americans from 1972 onward. Over multiple missions, he found the remains of 30 American soldiers in the tunnels. These weren't combat casualties. These were prisoners who'd been taken underground and never came back out. Sanza's missions were among the most psychologically brutal. He wasn't just clearing enemy positions. He was recovering the bodies of men who died alone in the dark. The close quarters fighting that happened underground was unlike anything else. In the war, when you encountered a Viet Cong fighter in a tunnel, tunnel. There was no cover, no room to maneuver, no backup immediately available. It came down to who saw who first and who pulled the trigger faster. The Viet Cong fighters knew those tunnels intimately. They knew every turn, every alcove, every trapdoor. They could navigate in total darkness while you were crawling forward with a flashlight that pinpointed your exact location. The advantage was always theirs. What made it worse was that you never knew if the tunnel was occupied. Some complexes had been abandoned. The Viet Cong had moved on and you'd crawl through empty passages for hours finding nothing. Other times you'd be 50 meters in when you'd hear movement ahead, or you'd see the glow of a cooking fire, or you'd turn a corner and come face to face with an enemy soldier who was just as surprised to see you as you were to see him. In that split second, everything slowed down. Both of you had weapons. Both of you were in a space barely wider than your shoulders. And both of you knew only one of you was getting out. Gas masks were standard issue for tunnel rats, but most of them learned not to bring them. The Viet Cong sometimes used poison gas in the tunnels, usually riot control agents like CS gas that they'd captured from American stocks. But wearing a gas mask in a tunnel was nearly impossible. It restricted your vision, muffled your hearing, and made breathing even harder in the already oxygen-poor environment. And if you needed to put the mask on in a hurry, you'd have to set down your weapon and your flashlight, leaving yourself completely defenseless for the 10 or 15 seconds it took to get the mask sealed. Most tunnel rats decided they'd rather take their chances with the gas than be blind and deaf when a Viet Cong fighter came around the corner. The psychological toll was immense. These men were crawling through spaces that violated every human instinct about safety and survival. Your brain is wired to avoid dark, confined spaces where you can't move freely. It's a survival mechanism that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. Tunnel rats had to override that instinct, force themselves to keep crawling forward when everything in their body was screaming at them to turn around. Some men could do it once or twice and then refuse to go back down. Others kept volunteering for mission after mission until they were finally killed or wounded badly enough that they couldn't continue. The worst part wasn't the actual danger, though that was constant. It was the anticipation. The knowledge that every foot forward could be the foot that triggered the trap. Every turn could be the turn where someone was waiting. You couldn't rush because rushing meant missing signs of booby traps. But you couldn't move too slowly either because the longer you stayed underground, the more likely the Viet Cong would realize you were there and prepare an ambush. So you crawled forward at this, agonizing middle pace, trying to balance speed with caution, knowing that one mistake would be your last. After clearing a section of tunnel, the standard procedure was to blow it. Tunnel rats carried explosives, usually cratering charges or blocks of C4, and they'd set them at key junctions to collapse the tunnels and make them unusable. But even this was dangerous. You had to crawl back out before the charges detonated, and if you miscalculated the fuse time, or if the tunnel was longer than you thought, you'd be caught in the explosion or buried under tons of collapsing earth. One tunnel rat, Rejo Ruiz, crawled through tear gas while dragging a cratering charge after 2 of his comrades had been wounded. He set the charge, crawled back out while half blind from the gas, and made it to the surface seconds before the tunnel collapsed behind him. The tunnel program continued through most of the war, though by 1969 and 1970 American forces were pulling back and turning more operations over to South Vietnamese units. The casualty rate among tunnel rats remained brutally high right to the end. The peak year for losses was 1969, when 18 men from just one Australian unit alone were killed in the tunnels. These weren't men caught in ambushes or hit by mortars. These were soldiers killed underground one at a time in fights that their comrades on the surface never even saw. The stories of individual tunnel rats are remarkable for their consistency. Every account includes the same elements: the fear, the darkness, the certainty that death was waiting just ahead, and the decision, repeated every single time, to keep moving forward anyway. That's what separated tunnel rats from other soldiers. Everyone in Vietnam faced danger. Everyone dealt with fear. But tunnel rats volunteered for a job where the fear was constant, the danger was immediate, and the only thing between them and death was their own ability to stay calm and focused in conditions designed to drive men insane. So when you think about the worst jobs of the Vietnam War, remember those 700 men who crawled into the earth with nothing but a flashlight and a pistol. Remember the 1 in 3 casualty rate. Remember that they volunteered for this, knowing full well what it meant. They went into the dark so their comrades wouldn't have to. They faced an enemy that had every advantage in an environment where there was no cover, no retreat, and no backup. And they did it mission after mission until they were finally killed, wounded, or lucky enough to make it home. That's what it meant to be a tunnel rat in Vietnam, and that's why it was the most terrifying job of the war.